Continuing with the book of Romans, chapter 1, today we turn to verse 21. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. I want to move on to verse 22 as well. Professing to be wise, they became fools. Verse 21 is, of course, preambled by verse 20. We saw in our last episode that God charges every one of us that we have no excuse. We cannot make a claim that he has not revealed himself enough to us. And therefore, verse 21 uses a conjunction, because. The reason we have no excuse now and into eternity. The reason that no son of Adam, even those who have not heard the gospel, would ever claim that God has not revealed himself when he has manifested himself and made himself so clearly seen and known through his creation. And the fact that he has revealed his deity and his eternal power so vividly and so clearly through everything that he made, we are told that we have no excuse whatsoever. And the reason that we have no excuse, because again, verse 21 lays this charge against every one of the sons of man. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful. Notice here, scripture tells us that they knew God. Those who claim that they do not know God, those who claim that God does not exist, scripture charges that they simply are arrogant against their Creator, because they know him. They know him, the fact that they take every day breath that he has given. The fact that our bodies that cannot be explained and DNAs that cannot be explained, the very bodies themselves and how they function, they tell of the glory, the eternal power, and the deity of this God. And so we know him. We know him, except that we do not glorify him as God. We treat him with familiarity. We undermine him. We take his place and revert to idolatry. We walk deeper into darkness instead of turning our eyes just to see how much God has manifested himself in us and in the world. Although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God. I want you also to notice here that it is possible to make a mention or claim that we know God, but not glorify him as God. That we think that he is one of us, that we think that we are equals. We do not understand the grandeur and the majesty of this being who is worshipped by the angels, who is worshipped by the saints in glory. This being whose scripture tells us in the book of Isaiah chapter 57 verse 15 that he inhabits eternity. The only one who is holy, the only God, there is no other who can compare with him. This God who created all things, this God who will never die, this God, we equate him to fellow human beings. We use his holy name as a swear word. Our imaginations are futile against him. Sometimes we even hate him, and therefore, as most atheists would demonstrate, that the main issue here is not very much intellectual. It's not the fact that they do not understand him. It's not the fact that they don't know him intellectually. The problem is therefore not an intellectual one, but a moral one. The fact that they hate this God who calls them to give account. They hate the idea that their lives are not their own, that one day they will be called to give account. I watched an episode somewhere, and there is this gentleman who walked to a minister somewhere on street, and the minister was making a case for God. And this individual who walked to the minister said to the minister, "How can I believe in a God who allows the Jews to be slaughtered in Germany in the way that they were?" And I was waiting for an answer to that question until the gentleman walked away out of anger and frustration. A very good example of how we hate God. He did not even wait for the answer. He asked the question and walked away. And so many of us are like that individual because of the anger that is bottled within against a holy God. All we do is to demonstrate our moral depravity by questioning his existence, by using his name as a swear word, by treating God with familiarity, by plunging our lives to destruction, going about life as if we are our own creators. All this to say that God has manifested himself and he expects a response. That the response is to glorify him, not as a fellow man, not as a king, not as a great teacher, but as God. To bow before him and worship him, for that is the suitable honor due to him. Consistently throughout scripture, in the book of Malachi, for example, you read God's complaint leveled against the nation of Israel. And he says to them in chapter 1, verse 9, that a son honors his father and a servant his master. Where then is the honor that is due to me and the reverence that is due to me? Because the nation of Israel would turn to worship God like any other God. And this is where, dear beloved, we often equate Christianity to other religions. That is what pluralism is really about. The argument that you can hold your view or claim about Christianity, allow me to hold mine about Islam or about Hinduism or about Scientology and all the other kinds of religions that are equated to Christianity. The reality is that none of these gods are worthy. None of the leaders of these religions are even worthy of being mentioned alongside the name of the great, glorious God, the Great One of Israel. He who is self-existent, who created all these beings that seek to equate themselves with him. Although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God. Neither are they thankful. According to science, we take about 22,000 breaths of air every day. How can we take so much breath and not be thankful? How can we live as tenants in this grand land, the vast galaxy, the vast solar system that God has placed us in and allowed us the freedom to enjoy, to travel, to see the beauty of it, and not be thankful? How can we not be thankful when this landlord has allowed us, even sometimes, to blaspheme him with that same breath that he gives us? And that's why I say the issue here is a moral one, not an intellectual one. That we are depraved fugitives who run away from him, and yet a futile exercise, because his piercing eye sees all things. And whether we like it or not, whether we are comfortable with the idea of the final judgment or not, the reality is that that landlord, that God, has every right to call us to judgment, because we are his creation, because we are sustained by him, because he's the one who has given us everything that we think that we acquire on our own. And therefore, we become futile in our minds when we do not glorify God as God, when we treat him as a fellow human being, when we are not thankful. Our thoughts become futile. They become darkened. And our hearts, our foolish hearts, become even more darkened. And so the problem of not glorifying God as God and not being thankful is that we retreat into greater darkness. Our minds are warped and perverted, and our hearts become also darkened. Dear beloved, I would like you to notice here the indictment, the fact that there are two journeys that we must make. The first is that we must either make the journey of knowing God, glorifying Him and being thankful, or we will make the journey of futility, a fool's errand of retreating back into darkness, thinking that that is our hiding place. And ultimately, even those who sit in great darkness and those who prefer darkness, they will be called to give account of their own lives. And on that day of judgment, as we would know from Scripture, and as we've just seen, we will have no excuse before God. We will be already judged. And so I want to call on you as a Christian. May it be said to you that although they knew God, or perhaps we remove the word although, but it should be said of us, they knew God, they glorified Him as God, and they were thankful. May that be true for you.